You are listening to No PC Allowed, aka No Political Correctness Allowed, and I am Mac Iverson. Mohammedanism is just one of many unmentionable elephants in the room that no one wants to talk about. Nowhere is the international death of common sense more obvious than with this 15-ton elephant suspended above our collective heads and hanging by a horsehair like the Sword of Damocles. This has been called the suicide of the West and also suicidal empathy. This Mohammedan monstrosity is about ready to snap and give way to completely crush Europe, and it's making strong overtures towards doing the exact same thing here in America. Europe's problem is with their invited, not invading, but invited Muslim hordes who have all but completely destroyed that entire continent, with the exceptions of Poland and Hungary, because they have intelligently put fences around their borders, fully knowing that to allow an alien culture that wants to decapitate all non-Muslims, basically, is probably not the smartest way to go. This is how sick and depraved the woke European culture has become. Local councils across England have admitted to spending nearly $100,000 to remove what they call unauthorized Union Jack flags, which is the flag of Great Britain. These flags were raised by the thousands throughout the country over the last summer in an outpouring of patriotism and civil disobedience against the mass migration agenda imposed by the Westminster establishment in league with the entire global deep state. Well, one of those flags were of the Hamas or LGBT WTF variety. Would they be taken down? Not by the British turncoat government. You see, to pass the test of being sufficiently woke, you have to be a supreme hater of all things good. St. Patrick's Day celebrations were greatly curtailed in Ireland, much of it due to nationalist fervor, longing for a traditional Ireland which really no longer exists, and with undertones against the grotesque invitational invasion of the Muslim masses into that country. Can you even imagine? You are essentially not allowed to fly the British flag in Britain except in limited circumstances. But the LGBT WTF flags, or terrorist Hamas flags? No problem. Fly, baby, fly. Now, if those flags were brought down by the government, it would get front-page news. The decay of Europe happened years before the Muslim immigrant invitation. And again, that is because this is not an invasion. It is an invitation, which is clearly why this is a continent-wide suicide, the suicide of Europe. This current setup, in fact, is far worse than even the setups just prior to World Wars I and II. Consider this. There were competing sides involving multiple nations in both world wars. But in the current scenario, every European country except for two are thoroughly infused with the enemy or the virus of Mohammedanism. It has infected every branch of government, intertwined and interwoven, thus making any peaceful resolution virtually impossible. Several European countries escaped the hell of both world wars, but nothing doing this time. Islam is, to its core, hostile towards any alternative belief system, which obviously means there can be no peaceful outcome unless, of course, Europe completely capitulates to the Muslim bullies. And as of today, that will be the likely outcome. There's a two-pronged reason or motivation for this willful and carefully planned self-destruction. Number one, and most obvious, is the deep state connection to the rotten European Union government in Brussels, which is also controlled by dark money influencers, or money launderers, who are continuously funneling money back into the coffers of deep state bribery machines that hides deep inside the deep state mafia, thus making the EU and the deep state one and the same. And reason number two for the suicide of Europe. Europe's massive social services industry for their citizenry could no longer be supported by just Europeans. This dependency upon a welfare state provided the impetus for all their insane immigration levels. Lazy, spoiled, and corrupted Europeans, now oversexed and largely unwilling to have children because kids are too much trouble and too expensive. But these spoiled, narcissistic Europeans could not just give up their taxpayer-funded gravy train. Oh, no. So they demanded cheap labor or immigrants, many of them Muslims, by the millions, to make their beds and clean their toilets. Therefore, they placed the idol of money and continuing to live the good life, which they clearly no longer deserved, above the safety and security of the entire European continent. I have seen propaganda films made by Chinese tourists that mocks and viciously tears apart European cities. These videos are shown to millions of Chinese to demonstrate how far the weakened West has fallen. But is it really propaganda when these videos are simply showing what is there? These videos mock everything about urban Europe, from dirty hotel rooms to graffiti everywhere, to foul, putrid smells, urination, filth, and defecation, occasional nudity, even fornication, sometimes on the sidewalks, roaming rape gangs. 80% of all rapes in Europe are committed by Muslims. This is how bad it is there. Imagine, if you dare, the worst thing that an adult could ever do to a child, and then multiply that horrifying image by 10 times. I've heard some of these stories, and I dare not speak of the details because it is so demonic. I will give myself nightmares if I even mention it on the air, so I don't dare do so. But again, imagine something 10 times worse than what the average mentally healthy person could ever dream up. That's how bad many of these child rapes and murders are in Europe, and there are many thousands of these sexual assaults going on constantly. Now I can hear some of you saying, "Hey, I went to Europe last year, and I never saw any of those horrible sights of which you speak. Besides, ChatGPT says it's no big deal." Yes, the fake news industrial complex wants to shovel you loads of bullshit to cover up this reality. But if you walk down a pleasant street, and moments after you pass, 4 people are stabbed by lunatics and 2 of them die, and several hours later you may pass by again and see not one shred of evidence that it ever happened. And because the media doesn't give it the attention that these kind of crimes once received, because they are so bloody common now, you may therefore conclude that all is right in the world. Fake news does not broadcast this the way it should. If it's anti-woke to point out the evildoers, then fake news will do its very best to cover it up. These videos have the purpose of giving the average Chinese citizen tremendous confidence in believing that even Chinese hyper-controlling fascistic communism, even that, is far superior to capitalism, because look at Shanghai. Sure, it's kind of screwed up, but hey, by comparison, in many ways, it's not as bad as London or Paris, or San Francisco for that matter. But capitalism in Europe isn't really capitalist so much as it is democratic socialist. But even now, that has transformed into an oligarchy, controlled by the world's most elite and secretive billionaires working in conjunction with communist fascist China to bring about a suicidal death of the West. In 2024 alone, more than 400 pubs went out of business in the UK. The pre-approved surface talking point is it's because of the cost of living. But what does that really mean? What caused that hyperinflation? Grotesque government spending and hyperfocus and pearl-clutching over the totally made-up specter of catastrophic weather hysteria. Oh dear! And what's the real purpose of this over-focus? To discourage the masses of middle-class Europeans into thinking there is no more hope for their families' futures. Remember, billionaire investors, in conjunction with China, never do anything without self-serving reasons. The self-implosion of Europe is pre-planned. The deep state calls it a period of transition, which is a perverted and twisted understatement if I've ever heard one. Money-laundered socialist monetary policy is responsible for crippling taxes, a mushrooming welfare state that embraces immigrants but ignores native-borns and leaves increasing numbers of them living on the streets. But the far more damaging reason for the mass closing of pubs is to shut off the voice of the average Brit. Historically, this is where the muscular class always went to vent their grievances and unwind so they could then go on to be their happy selves. These closures adds to the already overwhelming stress of just trying to survive. Do not think for one moment that the mentors of all this destruction, the Chinese Communist fascists, have not figured all this out. They, too, must tightly control their peeps from peeping up too much. Remember the Shanghai shutdowns over the flimsy excuse of the COVID hysteria? In 2022, for 9 long weeks, the fascist communist government locked down over 25 million Chinese in a mass social experiment to see just how far they could go, using COVID as the very weak excuse to exercise an evil degree of total control over its own people. Untold thousands starved to death or committed suicide. Those heart-wrenching videos are impossible to forget, of people banging on pots and pans from balconies screaming, help me," for weeks and weeks. But they were never allowed to leave their homes for any kind of temporary relief. Just imagine that level of evil. Western deep state politicians are the protégés of these teachers of communist tyranny. Their philosophy is to never let a tragedy go to waste in order to exercise maximum control over others. In Ireland, the average person who is sleeping on the street is native-born Irish. There is massive welfare for newly arrived immigrants, but almost no welfare by comparison for the native Irish. In Dublin, people queue up in lines to get into a mosque stretching several blocks. It is quite an amazing sight to see. All of them men and mostly within the military age of 20s and 30s. Men who are ready to fight for what they believe and happily die for, their wicked cause of martyrdom. Mostly because, as soon as they are martyred, they get to live in paradise with their 72 virgins. That is not godly, that is satanic. Here's the problem of the West. We don't have normal, healthy, emotional, psychological, anthropological reactions to the rape of our entire culture. Political correctness is a subtle and not so subtle form of brainwashing whose main job is to make you feel guilty for being perfectly normal. This is what I call evil. Many Muslims believe that everyone is born a Muslim, and it is their job to help you figure that out. It is a cultural reality that snitching on fellow Muslims is rare in the third world, even in the case of rape and murder. The individualistic culture of America does not exist with these people. Rather, there is a group identification dynamic that rules over Muslims. Even politically active totalitarians or communists are not allowed to immigrate into America. That is current federal law. But it's A-OK to allow millions of Muslims in? How does that make any sense whatsoever except for a culture hell-bent on suicide? In Christian America, there's the separation of church and state with the famous Jesus phrase of render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But with Islam, all fealty goes to Islam and there is no separation of mosque and state. Kudos to Trump for going after the radical mullahs. But the number one problem for Iran right now is that its citizens do not have guns. When Khomeini grabbed power in 1979, like most tyrants, he quickly went after gun owners. There was nothing like our Second Amendment over there. And that is the only reason why the Iranian people have not yet overpowered these corrupt mullahs, even after the outrage of some 50,000 citizens being murdered by the state within the past few months. But if Iranians had guns, none of that even could have happened. The equation is stupid simple. If the government does not fear the people will be enslaved. That always happens eventually. This is the main thing here. I've said some very critical things about Muslims, but just like I never blamed any illegal alien for crossing into America, I'm not blaming Muslims. If I were Mexican, I would break the law to get into the USA and escape that hellhole. I wouldn't think twice about it. I would break the law by running like a madman across the border, and I wouldn't think twice. And if you were smart, you'd break the law, almost any law, to escape the third world too. That's how bad the third world is. And don't think Mexico isn't the third world. In many ways, it absolutely is. So there's a massive difference between those unfortunate souls who are understandably trying to escape the third world and those guilty Americans who blatantly break the law by allowing them to come right in. The deep state is to blame for rotting out the foundations of Europe and America. Where will all this lead? Well, logically, it absolutely must lead to World War III, with the good old USA leading the counterattack once again. But this time, we will likely lose. Or at the very least, there will be a massive continent-wide European bloody civil war. It is far, far too late for any other scenario. I suppose there is one other possibility. Wokeified Europe refuses to wake up and grow up and instead totally grabs the ankles and fully submits to Muhammad. How's that for an image? But I'm not trying to be funny. This is common talk inside tens of thousands of mosques today. The West is like a woman to be mounted and inseminated by Muslims and be destroyed that way. This is how they talk openly, not only amongst themselves, but to infidels as well. Let me repeat that. The West is an effeminate, suicidally empathetic woman to be mounted and inseminated by dominant Muslims. They see men as the rulers of women, and that gives them the right to do as they wish with them. Now, does this matter at all to Islam's Western female-crazed fan base? Of course not. And why not? Because the women who love Islam have their suicidal blinders on. It's like those three demented monkeys. See, hear, and speak no evil of Islam. But isn't the sissified Western attitude fully deserving of Muslim derision? Don't we deserve to be mounted and humiliated in many ways? If we allow ourselves to be debased through feminist culture, if we allow it, and indeed we have, then obviously we most certainly are allowing ourselves to be targets of Muslim ridicule. I just don't think that Islam has any kind of claim of moral superiority over us. Both sides are supremely screwed up. Islam has its own sick and twisted version of woke, but it's not the sexually perverted kind quite so much as here in the West. On a visceral level, we are hated by them because we are a feminized culture that screams, we are weak, 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 weak. It is humanly impossible to respect the weak. Islam expert Dr. Gad Saad said this: as long as most progressive folks can identify their neighbor Ahmed, who's a very sweet guy, who's gay, who's married to a Jewish man, and who eats prosciutto and drinks vodka, that is the true representation of Islam. So I only have to come up with one person who seems to fit in within Western liberties, and voila, that becomes Islam, and all those other things that also seem to be linked to Islam are false Islam. Ahmed, my neighbor, who's very sweet, is the real Islam. Unquote. So Islam, just like Christianity, is A-okay as long as it fits the libtard mold of being hyper-tolerant. But Islam is not that way. This is a dopey, liberal woman's fantasy of the way things ought to be, not the way things are. These sick feminazis ignore human nature at their peril and at the peril of the entirety of Western civilization. Here's the reality. The nice Muslims are, according to the Quran, the bad Muslims. The bad or the mean Muslims are the good Muslims. Therefore, the libtards can't just wave a magic wand and toss a fistful of pixie dust up into the air and wish all this reality away. There are well over 3,000 mosques in the USA. Inside, most are teaching the following. There are 3 ways to conquer the West. Number 1, jihad of the womb. Number 2, jihad through immigration. And number 3, jihad by using your freedoms against you. They are saying, we Muslims will invade and circumvent your precious constitution. We will attain massive protections that all Christians want to use, but we will build and build and build our own power base until we outgrow and then ultimately overpower the weak Christian church. And that is because we, the Muslims, are a strong masculine culture. And most important, we want to win much, 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 much more than the weak, effeminate, distracted, and broken Christian church wants to win. And they can win through various types of conquest. There is the jihad of money, which includes business and investment, jihad of the tongue, or the building of propaganda avenues, and the self-explanatory baby jihad. The number 1 baby name in Europe is Muhammad. Historically, Muslims act one way when they are weak and one way when they are strong. When weak, they are fawning and passive. When strong, they can suddenly become bullies with shocking brutality. That is why they are akin to a ticking time bomb and therefore can't be trusted. They are like a rattlesnake poised to strike. But this snake may not even rattle as a deadly warning. The Chinese have a name for it. It's called hiding in plain sight or assassin's mace. The threat grows and grows and grows until it appears to no longer be a threat. And that's because the threat, although clearly obvious to everyone, is certainly there, and yet no real harm ever seems to come from it. And that's when it gets really dangerous. That's one of the main purposes for the thousands of mosques. These Trojan horses are highly organized, and many have large caches of arms, ready for the day when the threat finally becomes reality. And so it softens the public into gradually fully accepting it.
Oh, Muslims are such delightful people. They're so friendly and nice and always smiling at non-believers.
But there's an utterly fascinating story behind that as well. In Spain, during the 15th century, and before the Inquisition, many Muslims were baptized and converted to Christianity. They went to church every Sunday, they openly prayed and obediently followed the 10 Commandments even more than Christians did. And they did so publicly generation after generation, and they appeared to be perfect Christian converts. But inside their homes, they did the exact opposite. They read the Quran, and they cursed the infidel and swore to the destruction of their Christian society. In fact, just before the First Crusades, this is what happened in the Armenian city known as the City of 1,001 Churches. They were all burnt to the ground, and the Muslims pulled entrails from Christians, raped women and nuns on the altars. The reaction to this is actually just one of the examples which led to the counter-reaction of the First Crusades to redress all these evils. Today, Islam continues to maximize what the British like to call antisocial behavior. Brutal, violent behavior is common in Muslim societies. In the West, this is mostly taboo, unless sublimated through accepted channels like soccer and rugby. Many men enjoy beating people up. That's a fact of our dominating male natures. But average people can't do that, legally. But Islam allows for it in regards to enforcing Sharia law. This is why Western men, when they see this, and who are sick of liberated, dominating psycho bitches telling them how to live their lives and being their patsies, are gravitating towards Islam in large numbers. Psychopathic criminals are also attracted to Islam because it makes their violent inclinations not only legal within Sharia law, but also their martyrdom becomes holy and good, to be rewarded in heaven with 72 virgins. Another grand prize for testosterone-driven psychopathic alpha males who love cutting people's throats from ear to ear with or without the handy-dandy excuse of Islam. Therefore, many violent thugs are attracted to Islam and are greatly rewarded for horrible behavior. If Christianity cannot hold onto its men because disgusting anti-masculine woke undertones dominate and undermine the church, a life of meaning will be sought and found by these psychotics in the arms of Muhammad, when they really only needed a masculine Jesus as taught in biblically honest churches to save them all from tripping and tumbling down into the abyss to follow an imaginary macho savior like Muhammad, who has promised his martyrs an eternity of having never-ending sex in a harem of 72 underage girls, which, by the way, is easily inferred and deciphered from the word virgins. After all, the great gentleman Muhammad married a, wait for it, 6-year-old. It has been estimated by Dr. Saad that only a 20% takeover by Muslims means that there will be constant violence in the streets of America. Violent protests, kidnappings, bombs, chemical warfare, gang rapes in public, child rapes, shootings, and stabbings. It will be never-ending until Muslims convert the entire world by hook or by crook. Finally, if you still think the Muslim invitational invasion is no big deal because you estimate only 10% or so may be dangerous fanatics, consider this. Pretend you have a jar of jelly beans and only 10% are poisonous and would kill you instantly. Would you give that jar to your kids and say, go have at it? Isn't that the exact same thing as saying to your kids, only 10% of Muslims have blood in their eyes and want to cut your throat from ear to ear? But other than that, you really have nothing to worry about? Would you stupidly and foolishly say that to your kids? Because if you say nothing to them about Islam, then you are saying that to them. Albert Einstein said this: the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Charlie Kirk said this: Islam is totalitarianism masquerading as a religion. We cannot ignore the law of overwhelming numbers. Demography is destiny. It's simple math. For the foreseeable future, it looks as though Islam will completely overwhelm and crush the West. You are listening to one of the most heavily shadow-banned podcasts on Earth due to truthful content alone. So be sure to give us a thumbs up or 5 stars, write a review, and share. Do it now while it's fresh in your mind. You've been listening to No PC Allowed. I am Mac Iverson.